Look at.
Oh, yeah.
I took a gamble on this art locker. Hopefully, it'll paint a pretty picture. You see this? It's not a quarter. It's a game changer.
You win 600. I win 700.
Now, I know I joke around a lot, and I try to tell you guys a lot of things on my little Instagram post.
Rest in peace, Darrell Sheets. Also, I know Darrell would want something positive out of this, so he had a guy like really tormenting him lately on cyberbullying.
Chalk one up for Team Tank Top.
Gambler and Son, sir.
After the sudden death of Darrell Sheets, one voice people weren't sure they would hear from was Jarrod Schulz. But now, he's speaking. For years on Storage Wars, Darrell was a larger-than-life presence, the kind of personality that defined the show. Then, in April 2026, everything changed, and Jarrod's response revealed something fans haven't fully heard, raising questions about what was really happening behind the scenes. So what did he say? And how did Darrell's death affect the people closest to him? Join us as we reveal what Jarrod recently revealed regarding Darrell's tragic death. The death that changed everything. Since the 2010s, Storage Wars has become a reality television force to reckon with. The show had everything, from a high-stakes environment to rapid-fire auction-style bidding. While those had become highlights of the show, the main event has always been the cast ensemble, and Darrell Sheets was very popular amongst the audience, especially longtime fans who had been watching the show from its inception. Once he was in the groove and ready to rumble, he left the audience excited. More than simply putting in a bid for some mysterious, dusty storage locker, he had something else. Something that kept him valuable to the network. His high-risk, high-reward approach to the auctions. Since his debut on the show in 2010, he often opted for big risks and reaped sure profits, which, in some cases, might be small but consistently profitable. Talking about his most consistent acquaintances on the show, he was especially close to the franchise's fun villain, Dave Hester. He was often seen in random conversations with Jarrod Schulz, who was just as popular with the audience as Darrell. But while the camera often caught his risky deals and popular one-liner catchphrase, "That's the wow factor," his life behind the scenes eluded their lenses. Darrell definitely knew how to keep his business as private as possible, giving just about enough away in interviews, but not too many details. Before his appearance on the show, he had escaped the public eye, meaning he had never really felt like the target of paparazzi, hidden cameras, or private investigators going to any lengths to get real information on him. But fame brought them to his doorstep, and it wasn't long before rumors swirled about his failing health. He could have chosen to talk about it or simply let the rumors fade with time. He chose the latter and seemed to work some serious magic for his PR. He maintained the same energy on the show, but details of his private life remained shrouded, with no verified information emerging. Fast forward to 2019, and the first cracks in his health started to appear. He reportedly suffered a mild heart attack, congestive heart failure, and severe lung issues. The cat was finally out of the bag. It was no longer a rumor. Darrell really had health concerns, but something was waiting in the wings. Something with more finality. Death. On April 22, 2026, the 67-year-old was reportedly found dead in his home with a gunshot wound to his temple. Hit with a wave of gloom, the franchise fell silent. The loss weighed so heavily that it bore questions. While the broken cast members stayed in their shells, giving nothing away just yet, two had different ideas, Jarrod and Dave. But what exactly made his death more difficult to swallow? The day the silence took over. Although it wasn't the first time that the franchise had lost a cast member to a tragic death, Darrell's demise just hit too close to home. For context, the show lost the famous Rico Suave, who reportedly took his own life in 2014, Mo Pregoff in 2019, and Gunther Nazoda in 2023. And just 3 years after losing Gunther, fans and other cast members just couldn't combat another death in such a short time. Not like there was ever a good time for a loss. But while some fans mourned and grieved in silence, accepting the finality that death brings with it, others waited in the wings for something, anything at all. The silence was deafening. Nothing seemed to be happening until a couple of days after the news broke. After days of more intricate investigation, the cops' discovery changed everything. It seemed like a rather simple narrative to understand, but what made it bleak was that he had no intruder. Cops reportedly saw no sign of forced entry or other suspicious DNA around the crime scene. The reports immediately proved divisive among the fan base, with numerous suggestions nearly clouding the once popular grief that had overshadowed the franchise since news of his death broke. What could really have happened? Are the cops saying there was almost no chance that someone else took his life? Could this happy-go-lucky spendthrift, who treated every auction like poker, have taken his own life? The questions piled up, but were met each time with a large wall of silence from the show, the cast members, and even family. Consequently, the whispers raged silently like lightning in a bottle, with fans starting to question the truth behind his death. As fans moved in silence, waiting for an answer, Jarrod and Dave were quiet, neither granting interviews nor spilling anything to the public. But right in the middle of the chaos, the police made a more tangible discovery that fans held on to. After a thorough analysis of the crime scene, they suggested that the evidence pointed towards self-harm. At that point, silence was no longer an option. A man who seemed happy all the time, suddenly harming himself, made no sense to some fans. However, Darrell had deeper struggles, most of which only a handful of his friends knew about. One of those inner circle friends was Jarrod, who had stayed silent throughout the ordeal. But what happens when one of the men in his inner circle decides to reveal all the cards? Jarrod breaks his silence. For fans of the show, it was always difficult to imagine storage wars without Darrell. However, most fans began to make their peace with his absence in 2023, when he announced his retirement from the franchise after its 15th season. While that decision seemed difficult for the longtime audience of the show to accept, it wasn't the first time that fans had seen a founding member leave the show for a few years, only to return for cameos now and then. For context, Barry Weiss left the show in 2013, saying he had had enough. But a few life experiences later, including a near-fatal motorcycle accident, he returned in 2021, and fans welcomed him with open arms. In Darrell's case, nothing more was happening. His long career of dominating headlines in the auction world had finally come to an end, and there was no coming back. While acceptance was an option at the infant stages of his demise, the possibility that he might have harmed himself has opened a can of worms and loosened the lips of some rather famous tight-lipped stars like Jarrod's. Jarrod was definitely good at keeping a low profile since he came on the show. While he makes a splash on the screen, somehow he just vanishes when the camera stops rolling. Speaking of a private life, he had somehow always had that in common with Darrell. Fans had often speculated on different reasons why he had such a powerful knack for privacy, and, quite frankly, they mostly pointed to gory details of his past life. Jarrod was convicted of a felony, specifically possession of a controlled substance, in 1997, costing him 18 months behind bars in a state prison. But somehow, a few years after his release, he found his footing again in real estate until it crashed, met Brandy Passante, and found his way to the auction world in 2012. His connection with Darrell was well beyond any doubt. They stayed close to each other during negotiations, despite competition for lockers. There was no doubt that his death weighed heavily on him. At first, he continued on in silence, keeping his thoughts to himself and focusing exclusively on the job. However, when uncertainty surrounds the demise of his friend, there is almost no chance he would keep his silence for much longer. Sources close to the 48-year-old claim he has been in a rather difficult moment processing a close buddy's demise and claim that his death possibly had more to it than met the eye. As expected, the controversy mill had gone into overdrive, churning rumors endlessly. Following Jarrod's confession, many questions ensued, especially if it was only he who felt that way about Darrell. Well, he wasn't alone. Darrell wasn't just popular with the fans, he was well-liked by his colleagues too. But what happens when the ensemble starts to raise concerns about Darrell's demise? A conflicted Dave Hester. Dave was the regular fun guy who didn't mind being the villain sometimes to keep the show's competitive edge alive. But even he had friends, and Darrell was one of them. Critics had some reservations about Dave for discussing Darrell, doubting his ability to form strong ties with a colleague owing to his aggressive, competitive auction style. But Dave, in an interview, claimed that they were indeed rivals, but they respected each other. It was basic, but it made sense. Darrell, alongside Dave, was also a founding member of the show. To them, it did not seem like a life-altering opportunity, and Dave mostly did it because he wanted a track record that reflected his presence on television. But is it possible to shoot over 100 episodes of a show without finally making new friends? Dave claimed they sometimes met up for lunch and had time not only to discuss the show, but also to get into their personal lives, meaning he knew who they were behind the scenes when the camera stopped rolling. Not many colleagues could have made the same claims, but Dave could. Hence, fans listened when he spoke, hoping for an inside track on how a man like Darrell chose not to take a chance on life and preferred to simply stop living. If anyone had answers, it had to be the man he had lunch with now and then. But something shifted when he responded to these high expectations, claiming that they had last spoken in Long Beach, Flea Market, before he moved to Havasu, the titular region where he hosted his own auction spin-off. But before then, he definitely had enough insight into Darrell. Dave claimed that he could tell that he was clearly disturbed by something, so he tried getting into his head, forcing him to pull himself together, especially for his family. Although Darrell was crazy about family, especially his grandchild, he was losing the agency to keep himself in the right mental shape to take on the responsibility of familyhood even after leaving the spotlight that gobbled up most of his time. Fast forward to April 2026. Dave got a call from a television channel looking to get a comment from him on Darrell's death. Finding out like that broke him into a million pieces. But it gets even worse for him, knowing that he has chosen to take his own life. Dave claimed to have no information about Darrell's decision. "We didn't know what was going on with him. We didn't know if he was sick or anything," Dave reaffirmed. Although he refers to a light banter between them about being roommates in a hospital when Darrell had his heart attack, and he suffered from some health issues himself, he didn't think it was going to be enough to force him into having suicidal thoughts. He believed he had many better options, one of which was seeking help from friends, colleagues, a therapist, or just anyone at all, rather than suffering in silence. Dave was conflicted, fighting back his tears, and simply trying to ensure Darrell's reputation remained clean. But he wasn't the only one who had reservations about Darrell possibly folding fatally under pressure. The Dotsons drop a bombshell. Following Darrell's death and Jarrod's reported insistence on his death being a result of external influence, Social media has consistently spewed divisive opinions with specific claims that involve cyberbullying. A couple of days after his death, the concept became widespread, and the world continued to wait for a cast member to finally reveal the reality behind the scenes. Who better to do that than the lead auctioneers on the show? Don and Laura Dotson? Aside from the quick-fire bidding style, Don and Laura were just as perceptive as a fan. Watching the cast with so much interest and getting to really know them, other than just selling them a couple of storage lockers, and he definitely knew Darrell. Like Dave said during his interview with Extra TV, being a reality television star requires tough skin. But he wasn't entirely sure that Darrell had that, and neither did the Dotsons. Laura, especially, just could not wrap her head around it. She was unsettled at the thought of losing another cast member to self-harm after the demise of Mark Bolello on February 11, 2013. So, she met with his family, desperately looking for answers as to why a man like that would kill himself. Behind the scenes, Laura claimed that the 67-year-old was vocal about his suffering, as he was getting cyberbullied by an unknown user. Although he tried holding himself together on screen, it didn't take long before some of his colleagues noticed a change in his persona. He liked to make big deals, especially when buying a locker. But when selling, he would mostly push the buyer for every cent on the dollar, refusing to accept a lower offer. But in this deal with another cast member, Dusty Riach, he accepted a much lower offer than expected, noting that Darrell is not the type of person to just roll over on an offer. According to Dusty, Darrell had been asking for $125,000 for an estate collection, but quickly agreed when the buyer offered $50,000. It was weird. The famous gambler just folded like a house of cards over a deal without pushing for that extra dollar. However, the weirdness hits a dead end when his family confirms to Laura that he had been cyberbullied for over 3 years. Suddenly, his decision to roll over during a negotiation and slowly lose his confidence in the process made a lot of sense. In an interview with US Weekly, Laura decidedly told the truth about Darrell's death. The cyberbully had broken him to bits, making him feel like he didn't belong in the societal standing he had worked twice as hard to be in. But it didn't end there. He feared for his life and for those around him. He lived in uncertainty, and going public about it was still not enough to get his hacker to back off. But in this pool of uncertainty, how have other cast members contributed to his demise? And will the Sheets family get any justice? A legacy of pain and the anger left behind. In the aftermath of Darrell's death, one thing became disturbingly clear. There was more than one version of the truth, and no one could really put a finger on the correct version. However, despite these numerous versions of truths, Darrell's hurt was a consistent theme, and the world had no answers for a victim of abuse, leaving only pain, confusion, and anger in his wake. Sources close to Jarrod claim he hinted at something being off about Darrell's demise. Dave Hester just couldn't make any sense of his demise and got stuck in the confusion of it all. And the Dotsons, Laura, and Don pointed towards cyberbullying and external influences as the bits that pushed him into unaliving himself. But as the voices of anger and confusion seemed to be fading into the background, there was one more person whose voice had stayed hidden in the grand scheme of things until now. Renee Nezoda. Renee has always had a reputation for never shutting his mouth, and this time was no exception either. Although the pair had always been at odds on the screen, looking to get in on the same storage locker and fighting tooth and nail for it, off the screen, they were friends. He had been watching the situation from a distance, mourning in silence until he decided to pay his friend a tribute on Instagram, and everything changed. This wasn't some random tribute to a friend. He was voicing his anger, contempt, and disgust to fans who would deliberately have a go at a cast member with no care for their state of mind. Guys, just because you watch us on television doesn't mean you know us. It doesn't mean you know what we're about. Also, it doesn't entitle you to bully anybody. You shouldn't cyberbully at all, Renee exploded. He claimed fans had no idea what demons they face, what they go through, and how far they might push them off the edge. But more than he wanted to pay tribute to his colleague, he also vied for justice, calling out law enforcement for turning a blind eye to the bullying, even after Darrell had called them out. While the cops had kept their silence during the investigation, Page 6 reported that law enforcement had taken his complaints under consideration and added them to an ongoing investigation. Whether Darrell finally gets justice or the cycle of celebrity cyberbullying continues to get free rein, only time will tell. Who do you think really failed Darrell? His colleagues, who didn't read the signs earlier? Or the cops? Is there a chance that Darrell finally gets the justice that he deserves? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.